Thank you. My name is Jay Pather. I'm director of the Institute for Creative Arts, but in this context, I'm the chair of the Works of Art Committee. The Works of Art Committee is an official committee by the university to both acquire as well as curate artworks on the campus. And this particular committee has been in existence since July last year. So it's just been a short run, and during that time we've developed a series of activities in the first instance, to inform as many people as we can about what the policies are, to begin to develop a new curatorial policy around the hanging of artworks on this campus, and to look more deeply into it. Dr. Zetu Matabeni, those of you that are familiar, has come up with a policy paper which will form the basis on which artworks are curated on this campus. We're also in the process of acquiring new works to balance a very unbalanced collection of works. There are some statistics that Dr. Nomusa Makhubu will refer to in the analysis of artworks and how many works that exist and what they say, etc., etc. But all of this information has been moved around, and that's not the purpose of this meeting, and I don't want to take too much of time to do that. But I do want to say that together with the curation and the informing of the campus about what we're doing, we're also engaged with trying to make apparent or work with existing works that may not be problematic or difficult, and to open up a discussion to actually receive views and to act on those views. And I think that's very important for the context of this particular conversation. And that we are going to constantly be doing that. This hall, as you can see, is being redone as we speak, and this exhibition will be open at the beginning of April, and we'll continue to do that. But attendant with each one of this will be discussions about artworks, what they mean, what they could mean, and visions for transforming. And we are quite clear that the atmosphere on the campus with regards to artworks, with regards to symbols, does need to be transformed. On that we are quite clear. And the processes of going about doing that and understanding the recuration of spaces so that they better reflect this contemporary moment and not a moment from the past, that is preeminent in terms of what we are seeking to do. Within this context, we are now having a conversation which was meant to happen in November last year but couldn't because we had a series of shutdowns. This is around the Sarah Baartman sculpture that's been created by Willie Bester, who's on this panel. And the sculpture has had various iterations and has another one. So we're going to be listening to a range of speakers talk about it from different points of view, and then we will open it up to you. So I hopefully will get through all of this by 2 o'clock, and so I'm going to shut up and hand you over to the various speakers. I'm going to introduce you first to Nomusa Makhubu, who is a member of the Works of Art Committee, and after that each member will introduce themselves. Okay, thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really exhilarating to see so many of us here to talk about a work of art, to talk about the sculpture of Sarah Baartman. It's taken a very long time, and it really hasn't been easy because it's really involved a lot of emotions, right? So it's a very uneasy particular topic to talk about, but I think this particular moment, the fact that we're sitting here at this particular moment is something worth celebrating, right? So Because what it's also shown us is that with the Sarah Baartman sculpture, we're not only looking at a sculpture, we're not only looking at an artwork, a piece of artwork, we're not looking at an object. We're looking at something that represents a significant majority, right? We're looking at something that represents so many people on this campus. So we're not only talking about the story of Sarah herself, but also the stories of so many people who find it in that image, right? So my role today, I mean, I'm based at Michaelis, I'm an art historian, but my role today is on the Works of Art Committee. I'm really here to give you the context of the many different views about the sculpture in light of the covering of the sculpture, the first one in 2015 and the second one in 2016. Now, of course, it's also important to reflect on the fact that the images, the representation of Sarah Baartman that we encounter, many of them have been engaged with by a number of artists. And those artists themselves have interrogated the way in which that image comes to us today. So we have a very limited scope of the kinds of images that we know of Sarah, what she looked like, right? And they were based on specific caricatures, they were based on specific sketches and drawings of Sarah. So I want to reflect on one artist who one can sort of think of comparatively, or at least in relation to Willie Bester's sculpture. It feels terrible to have my back to the panel. But just to get a sense of the fact that there are so many artists who have covered Sarah's body. One artist that I can think of that I will talk about, of course there are many, one artist that I'll talk about is Senzeni Marasela, whose work was called Covering Sarah. Senzeni Marasela's work or performances are known to not only be these segmented events, but she lives she lives her artwork, right? Her artwork is her everyday experience. So what she does is she dresses up as her mother, whose name is, excuse me, it's been a very long day. Theodora. So living as Theodora, but also living as Senzeni. Senzeni, of course, sort of talks to the experiences of black women and black women's bodies. But in one work that she completed in 2011, now this is way before the coverings here, in the work that she completed in 2011, Theodora, the imagined Theodora, of course, is portrayed with Senzeni Marasela and with Sarah Baartman in beautiful ink drawings, but also in these beautiful tapestries that she's sewn together in silk and cotton, but very intricate work, right? And what they do in the images is they dress Sarah up and they walk with Sarah through modern day Johannesburg. But they end up with Sarah in a crowd of people. So Sarah becomes part of us. Sarah becomes the collective, right? She becomes part of the collective rather than the individual anomaly. And so that work resonates with so many other voices that have been involved in understanding the image that comes down to us in relation to what we see as Sarah's dignity when she's here and in her location. So I think the one thing that becomes important is not only obviously to focus on Sarah's body or the representation of Sarah's body, but the locatedness of Sarah, right? Locatedness of Sarah in us, the located of Sarah at UCT, but also the fact that she mirrors a global body politic. She mirrors a particular kind of relationship in terms of where she's been, but also the experiences that she's had, not only here, but abroad, right? So she mirrors quite a number of things, and those things are contradictory. So what we're faced with is engaging with a different kind or different kinds of visual languages in not only understanding what it is we're looking at when we're looking at her body, but also in understanding her locatedness here and what that means in terms of what she represents. So the covering in 2015 and 2016 was an engagement with not only looking at Sarah's body as that sort of canonized, caricatured image, but also looking at, but also thinking about how people relate to image, not only the story of Sarah, but the image of Sarah. Right? So what becomes important, obviously, is to locate the work of Willie Bester within that visual language, but also within the various campaigns that were particularly important in bringing her remains back to South Africa. So Sarah, Willie Bester's representation of Sarah, of course, is made through what has become a signature of Willie Bester's. Most of us will recognize the work of Willie Bester anywhere we see it, because he always works with the industrial detritus, always works with industrial debris, to comment on the decay or social decay that comes out of the imperialist process. But what does that then mean in the representation of the body of Sarah, the representation of Sarah, but also more importantly, what she represents in us, right? So it's a multi-layered argument that I think we should be having, right? And I think my role today really is to be able to stimulate those different views about the particular image that we're looking at when we're looking at Sarah, but also understanding what it represents in all of us. But also to say that in the past, so those coverings were recognized, or at least most people saw them as a particular kind of concealment of the work or as a censoring of the work. And of course today what we want to have is a rich debate and discussion about the difference between a visual language that is responding to a visual image as opposed to a concealment of an artwork. So what this really aims to do is really to open up the space for those multiple voices, and I'm going to turn over to the panel in order to hear those different voices and the different views, and of course we'll be open to the different views of the audience.
Great, thank you very much, Nomusa Makhubu. Thank you. We're going to hear from Willie Bester next, from the artist.
My name is Willie Bester. Sometimes I wonder what's wrong with white men, because people mistaken me for a white man, according to my name. I was inspired by Diane Ferris, which I brought because the sculpture is in this collection for the last 15 years, and it's the only sculpture that gave me this lot of trouble. So every time I must come back and explain. And today I brought Diane Ferris to come and explain for herself, because she inspired me to build the sculpture.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Willie. Thank you to the committee. I wrote the poem in 1998. The poem is going to be 20 years old this year. We had a reading at Willie Bester's house where I read the poem, and Willie was inspired. He felt something deep, and he didn't tell us. He just invited us 3-4 months after the reading to come back for another reading, where he then unveiled the sculpture that he made for Sarah. Sarah came home directly as a result of that sculpture and the poem, because the sculpture went onto the internet and the poem went with the sculpture. And it is there where a French senator saw the poem that he wrote to me to say in incorrect English, "Dear Miss Ferris, we were emotionally removed by your poem. So I want to thank Willie for the sculpture, because the sculpture gave the poem the ability to fly even further. And I want to recite the poem to you now. I've come to take you home, a tribute to Sarah Baartman. I've come to take you home. Home. Do you remember the veld, the lush green grass beneath the big oak trees? The air is cool there, and the sun does not burn. I have made your bed at the foot of the hill. Your blankets are covered in buchu and mint. The proteas stand in yellow and white. And the water in the stream chuckles, sing songs as it hobbles along over little stones. I've come to wrench you away from the poking eyes of the man-made monster who lives in the dark with his clutches of imperialism, who dissects your body bit by bit, who likens your soul to that of Satan and declares himself the ultimate God. Come to soothe your heavy heart. I offer my bosom to your weary soul. I will cover your face with the palms of my hands, run my lips over the lines in your neck, feast my eyes on the beauty of you, and I will sing for you, for I have come to bring you peace. I've come to take you home where the ancient mountains shout your name. I have made your bed at the foot of the hill. Your blankets are covered in buchu and mint. The proteas stand in yellow and white. I've come to take you home where I will sing for you. For you have brought me peace. For you have brought us peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that's your presentation. All right. So we'll go on to Gwenda. You want to just introduce yourself first?
Yes. Hello, I'm Gwenda Thomas. I'm the library director, where the Sarah Baartman sculpture is curated at the moment and has been since it was purchased by the university. I've just been asked to speak about perhaps the journey around the Sarah Baartman with the covering of the sculpture. The first covering, which was referred to earlier, was in around about February, March of 2015. There was a group of drama students who, I think in knowing about the poem, felt that it was important for the sculpture to be covered. It was part of the Rhodes Must Fall, which had started in the February of 2015. So through a very moving dance sequence of drama students, the sculpture was covered. It remained like that till the December of 2015, when the university, the registrar indicated that with the end of the year, the academic year, that the covering should come off the sculpture, which we did. In 2016, in April, I think it was the 9th or the 10th of April, there was a commemorative march, a walk from Bremner up to the upper campus to commemorate the Rhodes Must Fall and the removal of the Rhodes statue. And in that process, we were approached that one of the stations along the walk, the commemorative walk, would be that of the Sarah Baartman sculpture. And through facilitation, Paul Weinberg was involved in putting up an exhibition, photographic exhibition, at the Center for African Studies Gallery. And in that process, there was concern that the walk there would be many people. So we had discussions with Wandile Kasibi, who was part of arranging the walk, commemorative walk. And there was a lot of discussion about the hurt and the pain of Sarah Baartman, and the feeling that from the students on the commemorative walk to really bring dignity and reverence and respect to the sculpture, to cover it. There was a sense of where it's curated currently. It's in a very sort of structured space. It's up against a pillar. You can't see Sarah Baartman, the sculpture, in its entirety. A sense that Sarah Baartman all her life was stared at, and even as a work of art, stared at again as you come up the stairs. So through that process, there was a very moving ceremony where 10 or 8 women came in, and they, as part of one of the stations of the walk, covered Sarah Baartman. And it remained covered until December of last year, 2017. And as part of the journey and the discussion and the debate and the engagement, now facilitated by the Works of Art Committee, we're now at the point where Sarah Baartman is no longer covered, and I think the journey continues and the debate and the engagement.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi, my name is Gondiswa. Excuse me. I am one of the students who did the initial performance and, I guess, robing rather, of the Sarah Baartman statue. There's a moment here which I think we need to contextualize, and this moment is one which is about the black student at UCT trying to do not just existence but also liberation. Right? And so this emerged out of the RMF occupation. And during that week, whereas the other students were doing protests in other ways, we challenged ourselves as performers and body people, how might we do in an alternative way to bring understanding, a deeper understanding, and also just to unveil, the white supremacist mechanisms of UCT, because the protests were not working. Right? Conversations were not working, right? So what else? What else? And one of the things that we knew that we would have to do was we would have to perform it, right? And to understand that this pain is an embodied thing, and it's located deep in the memory of the body, our bodies having been traumatized, and then also relating across to other bodies who we know carry the inscription of pain on their bodies, on their black skins, and then how to release this for the understanding of everybody, I guess, and also like the plus minus 20,000 white people at UCT who did not seem to understand. So in this time of contestation, we thought to ourselves, how do we visibilize the black pain narrative, especially when, excuse me for this, but when the white people of UCT were saying we're throwing shit and we're throwing out toys, right? And because we understood that the body remembers, right? And that this black body cannot exist here neutral, right? I carry with me not just like the present of just like my particular past right now, but the whole entire past of 300 years of blackness being done this to by the white supremacist rule. And that because of that, this body is implicated in politics. So we didn't just do a performance here, right? So this was not speaking against Sarah Baartman. It was not. We started off throwing ourselves in cages against CJR and Cecil John Rhodes. This is when he was still there. And when that didn't work, we were like, okay, how else? What else exists here on this campus that we can say, there it is, that's the pain, and this is us relating to that pain. And that's when we decided that we would do the performance at the Sarah Baartman statue. Because one of the things for us was the sculpture is there, but nobody sees it. And by nobody sees it, I say that particularly because blacks don't exist here, right? So we see it, but we are nobody who sees it. And the whites who are allowed to do their existence in the space walk past it. It's window dressing. It's, just one of the many reasons we pay so much to come here at UCT. Because we've got brilliant, brilliant, brilliant artists who UCT can bring their works here, right? So our thing was, how can we use this statue here, which is somehow being, just walked past, it's invisibilized. How do we use that to bring attention to our protest? Which is not to say that what Sarah meant and what she means and what Willie meant her to mean when he made that sculpture and when they put it here, which is not to say that that isn't important, but again to locate the context of the dying black student who just needed a way, a language, right? And so we performed in relation to, firstly, the Oppenheimer Library as the site, right, where she is held. And in reaction to the continued fetishization of our bodies, our narratives, and the voyeurism, actually, of whites here, and just in South Africa and the world in general. And so then we asked ourselves, how do we visibilize her, and therefore us through her? Because she is our mother, she is our story, she is our history, she's our pain. So we painted ourselves black. Black in the way to speak back to this darkest heart Africa thing that people, the colonial other keeps perpetuating. And we covered ourselves, especially our private parts and loincloths, to speak to this thing as well around dignity and what it means to have Sarah there. And we were wearing as well, like things kind of like aprons, but asking ourselves a couple of questions. I know I'm taking long, Jay, I apologize. And we asked ourselves a couple of questions around this, right? Asking, what is dignity for this body, right? This Sarah body that is here in the space not being seen. And therefore, what is dignity for this body here in UCT trying to exist? Is dignity related to the gaze, especially of the white colonial other? Can we neutralize that, the context of the gaze? Is dignity about visibility and curating? Is dignity about context and understanding? Is dignity about site and subject? So we see Sarki, the nobodies here at UCT, but do the 20,000 whites of UCT. And what Willie Bester did is he breathed into metal, molded a being of this body, reclaimed these bones, and she still remained an object. That's what happened. She still remained an object. So we asked ourselves, how is this possible? And asking about Sarah, how is it possible that this beautiful work of art is still just here to titillate the gaze of the fetishist whites, right? We came back to finding ourselves asking, how could it be possible that we are here, because we are here, not just displaced bones, but here at home, supposedly on our land, breathing bodies, and also not here, objects. So the objectifying of Sati as window dressing in the hallowed halls of CJR, right, speaks to the objectifying of black bodies by this academy. We do not exist here. Sati is not seen here. Sarah is not seen here. So how then do we do existing in this space? How do we bring power and visibility to Sarki, Sarah? So we traveled out in chains to Plaza, to Cecil, to Kramer, to Bremner, chained at the pelvis, done, by bone to Sarki, who is still the object of the white colonial gaze. And for us the question was, how do we subvert that? How do we, invert that? How do we transgress? How do we do dignity for ourselves, which is liberation and existence?
Good afternoon. My name is Lorna Houston, and I'm the President of Convocation. I'd just like to start with a reflection on what I think art is. To me, art reflects the society that helps us to remember, to question, to heal, and to move forward. It reflects the expression of the artist, but it also solicits a response from those that participate or gaze at the art. The relevance of art is influenced by the context within which we encounter the art. And as I've reflected on preparing for this conversation today, I realized that that is one of the biggest issues in relation to the sculpture, is the context within which we have encountered it. I went to look at the sculpture, which I hadn't seen before, 2 weeks ago, I think, and I hadn't seen it before because previously it'd been robed. So it was the first time I actually saw it without the robes, and I just stood there trying to understand what is this artwork about in the library. And I don't know if everybody here has seen it, but it's a very magnificent piece of work. One can see the attention to detail and the tremendous effort, the time, the thought, the design, the beauty of the work of Willie in creating the art. And then as I stood there, I started to feel the pain of the art. And physically, I felt that. Physically, I started to be triggered by my own experiences of sexual violence as I watched that art. And I understood why this has been such a contentious piece of artwork. Why this amazing tribute, on one hand, is also a cause for tremendous frustration in the university. Why there's so much of a back and forth, a push and pull about one artwork in particular. As we've heard from Jay, there's many artworks that have been questioned, considered, thought about, some burnt, others simply removed. So what makes this special? And what makes it special, I realize, is we are not in a university that has fully recognized, first of all, how it has treated and continues to treat the black body, as we've heard from Kwantiswa. If we can start to do that as an institution, then we can start to change that. Then we can start to recognize and experience such a work of art differently. But right now, all it is doing is reflecting back to me as a black woman and to others, the pain that we've experienced. It isn't helping us to see this and say, this is a story of something that happened. Thank goodness it's not happening anymore. And I think that is where we need to go, but it's not where we are right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So without further ado, I want to hand it over to you now for any questions or any comments you want to make. Ultimately, this, just to contextualize while you get your thoughts. Oh, you don't need time to get your thoughts. Thank you very much. So just to say, we'll take a series of about 3 questions, and then we'll ask for comment from the panel.
Thanks very much for to the panelists for a very engaging discussion. I was just wondering the process that was described with how the statue was robed twice is quite a detailed description of what happened. How did the statue then become disrobed? The narrative is just that the statue is now disrobed. How did that happen? Who did that? Why?
Okay, well, that's a factual question. If you don't mind, I'll just attend to it, because we didn't do that. So while the sculpture was robed, there was agreement between the artist and the committee that we have what was going to be this discussion in November. This discussion had to be postponed to February because of the shutdown. In the meantime, in January, around about the second week of January, we had heard, I was traveling and I got a mail to say that the sculpture was disrobed. And at that point, nobody knew who and why. And the Works of Art Committee issued a statement to the effect that we, in the absence of this being articulated as a university position or any of that, or any official position, we urge that we be allowed for the process to continue. And the tacit thing was, of course, for it to return to its origin, to what it was, so that we could have this conversation. It was then disclosed that a staff member, now an ex-staff member, in the library had taken the robes off. In an evening, or in other words, out of visibility from anybody else, and it became apparent that it was him. And then the university was in a position to either instruct it robing or not robing, and the decision was to continue with the discussion. Does that help? So right now, this discussion is still happening, despite the fact that it's the sculpture, which the robing was what inspired this discussion. But even with it being unrobing, we've gone ahead with having this very important discussion. So we have one question there too.
Yeah. Thanks. I hear about the process of the staff member removing, disrobing the most recent one. What we are interested in knowing is when the registrar issued that the statue be disrobed, what was the reasoning behind, and what was the motivation behind? I'm not sure if I'm clear.
There's a factual thing that I'm missing, because the registrar, I don't know, issued anything for it to be disrobed. The librarian did.
Oh, okay.
Not the registrar,
So
the librarian.
there are two incidents, right? There are two incidents of Sarah being robed, right? In the first instance, she was disrobed, then she was robed again, then she was disrobed. And you are describing the staff member disrobing on the last incident.
Yes.
Now we want to know what was the reasoning behind the first incidents?
Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay.
In the December of 2015, the staff within the library had asked whether the robes could be taken off. So the question was put to the registrar, who said yes, they could. So it was just part of a process of inquiry from staff. Staff felt that the covering up of the artwork was something that we should take up with the registrar. So that was the reason. So it was just a question put to the registrar, and he said yes. And then in the April of 2016, then there was the commemorative walk to sell it for the Rhodes Must Fall.
I just want to correct a gross misrepresentation by Gwenda Thomas. I worked at the Center for African Studies Gallery at the time of the Rhodes Must Fall commemoration. I was not the curator of the exhibition. Under the instructions and with my colleagues at the Center for African Studies, I facilitated an exhibition called Voices from Within, which was curated by Wandile Kasibe and the Rhodes Must Fall movement. as has been pointed out, it moved to various sites on its way to its eventual destination, which was the Kaz Gallery. As you all might know, the exhibition never opened. But I am definitely not the curator of that exhibition. I was simply facilitating the space for and on behalf of the Center for African Studies.
A comment which I think will lead to a question. I've always liked the definition of great art, that great art delays the eye. And I think in the case of Willie Bester's sculpture, not only has it delayed the eye, it has led to an impassioned appeal with very many reflections on what does it stand for, what does it represent, does it alienate, does it respect, all those issues which are totally relevant. But you are looking at an important work of art which makes you passionate, which makes you respond. Surely that is a huge tribute to the artist. And everything around it, and the robing or disrobing, quite frankly, is almost irrelevant. It just reflects what people see in that wonderful artwork.
Okay, go ahead.
In response to the curation topic around the Sarah Baartman statue, any curator knows that it is the context that you provide around the artifact that helps the viewer to make meaning from it. And this particular artifact has gained so many levels and layers of meaning in the past 3 years that I don't think we can ignore. What we have heard today is the history of a lot of those layers that have been absent from what has been presented to us in the past 2 years around the sculpture. What we have seen, what has been provided to us in the curation of the sculpture in the past 2 years has been an authoritative but oblique description of the sculpture and a bit of the life of Sarah Baartman, but none of this very critically important information that we've heard today. And I think it is a sad indictment of our lack of engagement with this process, that it's only really happening now. And all of these stories, these responses that have come out, should have been visible around the sculpture from the beginning. There were some students in Library and Information Studies who made an effort to get that started. They placed a QR code next to the sculpture. Part of the curation effort that was made was to actually censor that and remove it, which I think is quite sad. That additional context that they provided included interviews with Willie and with Diane, and with some information from the protesters around this. And it's sad that this is only coming to light more publicly now.
Hi. Thanks for the panel, everyone. So I wanted to ask you a question, Willie, and maybe just to clarify, because it feels like maybe at the bottom of this conversation is the idea of whether the artwork should be there or not. But actually, it feels like something different is happening, because the artwork has been there the whole time, but it's just appeared differently over time. And so it's interesting for me that something important happens when you clothe the representation of someone, and when you cover it, because it hasn't actually been taken away. So I guess I'm wondering around whether this whole conversation is maybe useful, because the statue hasn't been removed. Its meaning has just become more collective and contextually based. So I guess I'm wondering from you, Willie, whether what you would want or how you'd want the statue to be seen, or whether you can kind of relate and appreciate the fact that the work has just been recontextualized and made contemporary, I guess.
Okay. Great, that's a great question, but can we just take 3 questions now so that different people can respond? Yes.
Thank you. I would start by saying that I don't have any artistic background, but as a student, I just want to ask, what is more important, the beauty of the art or the impact that it has on the individual student who is studying right there in the library every day? I feel like if the statue was not robed at first, there was not going to be any problem. But now that we saw it robed and unrobed, that is where the head comes in. Because I was never offended by the statue when I came to UCT in 2015, but now that I saw the process of something, they place a robe on it, now it being disrobed becomes a source of offense. So my question, to state it clearly, what is more important, embracing the beauty of the art or the impact that it has on the psychology of the individual student studying? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So we've got 2 questions for the panel. We'll start with Willie.
I'm not used to feeling answers. I initially got involved fighting the apartheid system, and then we were fighting the institutions that collect white art. It's the National Museum, the South African National Museum, all institutions that give so much attention to only white art. Then in the meantime, I picked up a lot of experiences in this fight. We were quite a collection of different artists, and we were on a basis of not our skin color, but what we could contribute against the fight against the apartheid system. Then when this thing happened, it was very disturbing for me, and it's very uncomfortable that so much attention is given to my sculpture alone. With this, which I called it Kristallnacht, when the paintings were taken from the walls and set on fire outside, and I'm sure my sculpture would have been thrown in the fire as well. And some art is boarded up, and I'm not going to be happy if a solution is found only for my piece of sculpture. I think it's an insult to what I stand for, and it's also an insult for the collection. And I would like that we have another meeting where we bring in all those artists so that they can come and explain themselves what the meaning of their art was, and also what purpose they feel their art can contribute. My dream was to contribute to a better society, and I'm sure the sculptures sit in an uncomfortable space. It's not in a museum where there was a special place carved out where I could put the sculpture. The sculpture sit in a very uncomfortable space. But this space is also about who we are. We sit in uncomfortable spaces. We don't know how to deal with one another. And I can explain that I carry this so-called black paint from the beginning. But my sculpture will contribute to a place where we can overcome any pain. So that we come and get together as human beings where we can soften this pain. We have to share the space and not come and dominate as in the past. I'm not going to stand for that. And I'm not going to be at peace as long as other things are boarded up. Thank you, sorry.
Thank you. So just again, some factual corrections to make. Yes, indeed, the Works of Art Committee meets in between the next 1 or 2 weeks to actually deliberate on what comes out of this discussion. So the Works of Art Committee decides on, decides on curation. So the Sarah Baartman sculpture is definitely part of its ambit in terms of what gets done. So hence this kind of trying to get a sense of different kinds of view. The thing about works being boarded, etc. It's also this is about information, right? Because there needs to be a distinction between the few artworks that were taken down because the artworks task team, as a result of its consultation with student body, identified certain artworks that were serving as triggers, as difficult moments in a difficult time. So it's all contextual, right? It was during the protests, etc. But there were several artworks, in fact, in the absolute majority, and I can give you the numbers, and those numbers are available. A number of artworks were removed for a perception of security by the curator at that time, by the curator of the Ermister Museum in consultation with management. So we must be quite clear about that, because there's a sense that artworks were ripped off because they were found to be all kinds of problems with it, but that wasn't the case. The case was, and largely, a number of artworks were actually removed because they were like water lilies and, landscapes, pretty things. But they were removed because they were seen to be vulnerable, because they were easy access in a time of difficulty on the campus. So these contexts really need to be seen for what they are. And this, the press loves this thing about, UCT pulling down artworks because they are problematic. And that's not really the case. When you look and you analyze the actual numbers against what were removed because there was a perception of their security. And that's it. Again, it's a perception. Lest we forget, and I'm not defending anything, lest we forget, artworks were destroyed on one occasion, on one day. That's the only time that it happened. So when we are deliberating in this way, we need to place all these facts where they are in order to proceed forward. So just to say finally that ultimately we are going to deliberate on where the work is, and someone said that there was, it is such a powerful work. Absolutely, and I think that's the point. That's the difficulty in the deliberations of the Works of Art Committee, is that it is not an unpowerful work. It is a very relevant work. Hence, its claim for visibility. And its awkwardness of where it is curated right now also speaks to some difficulty in how it's being viewed. The point about that when it was robed, or when it was unrobed, and when it was robed, in both occasions may not have been the issue, but now that it has been removed, could be a point that we need to consider. I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for this is an incredibly passionate subject, as well as a subject that's going to take a fair amount of cerebral understanding amongst the committee in terms of how we position the work and what we do with it. But this is not, of course, this is just one of a series of conversations around artworks. On Thursday, we have a performance that will start on the square and come into the hall by Mandla Mbotwe. And please be around for that, and that will also contain some information about the future. And then we open this section of the gallery at the beginning of April, and subsequently we'll have several conversations. If there are any questions around the Works of Art Committee, and what it does. Our details are all you can even send me a personal email on my email address at uctj.patha@uct.ac.za. If there's anything that you want us to address inside of the committee, and if you're curious about what then is now happening with Sarah Baartman, we'll be very prepared. We are committed to keeping all the areas, all the channels around the Works of Art Committee completely transparent, including the collection, and we're opening our website in a couple of months to be able to make the collection available to everybody, as well as all our deliberations. I really thank you for your presence here, and let's thank these fantastic panelists. Thank you.